Well, let's open our Mus'haf. Hopefully we can finish our surah today, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم سورة الأعلى أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبح اسم ربك الأعلى. Declare the perfection of the name of your Lord Al-A'la, the highest, the most elevated. الذي خلق فسوى, the one that has created and he has formed. والذي قدر فهدى, and the one that has measured out and decreed and then guided. وَالَّذِي أَخْرَجَ الْمَرْعَى, and the one that has brought forth the pasturage. فَجَعَلَهُ هُثَاءً أَحْوَى, and then he made it هُثَاءً, he made it flattened. أَحْوَى, no, sorry, هُثَاءً is dried. أَحْوَى, and dark. سَنُقْرِئُكَ فَلَا تَنْسَى, we will cause you, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to read. فَلَا تَنْسَى, in other words, read the Quran. فَلَا تَنْسَى, and you will not forget إِلَّا مَا شَاءَ اللَّهِ, except that which Allah has willed. إِنَّهُ يَعْلَمُ الْجَهْرَ وَمَا يَخْفَى, verily He, Allah, He knows الجهر, that which is said publicly or done publicly, وَمَا يَخْفَى, and that which is concealed. وَنُيَسِّرُكَ لِلْيُسْرَى, and we will ease for you and we will facilitate for you لِلْيُسْرَى, to the ease, the deen of ease. فَذَكِّرْ, so remind. إِن نَفَعَتِ الذِّكْرَى, if the reminder is beneficial. سَيَذَّكَّرُ. So we ended there with verse number 9, I think. And let's carry on, inshallah. سَيَذَّكَّرُ مَن يَخْشَى. سَيَذَّكَّرُ. سَيَذَّكَّرُ is what is the word verb?
Mudari of the second verb.
For the fifth verb.
Oh,
Your second, your fourth, your fifth. Any other takers? So you find that this actually comes from سيتذكر. So what's يتذكر from? Fifth verb. So not يتذكر, it is يذكر. Just try to say the and a ta quickly. The. If you can see that if you're taking a the and a ta, the makhraj is close. The. Your tongue just moves a bit. يذكر. So in other words, because the makhraj is close, we just join the two. يذكر, but يتذكر. So it's going to be the Madi of the fifth verb. Mudari of the fifth verb. يذكر. So يذكر. One of the meanings of the fifth verb is inflection. Like to cause yourself to remember, to be reminded, to remember, to pay heed. Will remember, will pay heed, will cause themselves to remember. Who will do that? مَن يَخْشَى. What does مَن يَخْشَى mean? Man, the one that yakhsha. Yakhsha is fear. Yakhsha is a specific type of fear. What type of fear is yakhsha? As opposed to khawf.
In awe.
In awe, khashya in awe, yes. Khawf is generally a fear of something physical. Like you have fear someone's going to beat you up or kill you or something, that's going to be khawf. Whereas khashya is a fear based on knowledge, meaning what you know Allah's greatness, and because of the knowledge of Allah's greatness, you have this fear, which like a sense of awe, because of knowledge, not because necessarily obviously it's qiyamah and punishment. But I'm saying here in terms of khashya comes from the idea of knowing the greatness of something and then having that fear for that thing based out of knowledge. So in other words, so Allah says here, فَذَكِّرْ, so remind, then there's going to be two responses. So يَذَّكَّرُ مَنْ يَخْشَى, will be reminded, will pay heed, who, man, those who yakhsha, those who have awe, who have fear. Allah left out the maf'ul there, but who would the maf'ul be? Of Allah. Those who have awe and reverence and fear of Allah. وَيَتَجَنَّبُهَا الْأَشْقَى, وَيَتَجَنَّبُهَا الْأَشْقَى. Yatajannab is what? What is the what verb? يتجنب يتفعل.
بابا.
Again, fifth verb مضارع. تفعل يتفعل تجنب يتجنب. يتجنب means what? What's your jamb? What's your jamb?
Avoidance.
So your jamb means avoidances, but what's the meaning of your jamb? Your jamb is your
Avoid.
side. Your side of your body is called your jamb. Your side of your body is called your jamb. So yatajannab here means that you make your side far. You make your side of your body far away from it. Meaning what? You turn away or you avoid it. You make yourself far. وَيَتَجَنَّبْ will turn away or will avoid it, will not heed it. Ha, going back to the dhikra. وَيَتَجَنَّبُ and will avoid it, will turn away from it. Al-ashqa. What's al-ashqa? Someone shaqi. What's the opposite of shaqi? Normally is sa'id. Someone sa'id is someone who is happy, who is like successful.
Miserable.
Here in terms of physical health or wealth or anything, shaqiya in terms of they actually have no iman, and this leads them to that, to be a terrible person, that wretched person. وَيَتَجَنَّبُ the one who yasla. What does yasla mean? The word salah actually means when you feel the heat of something. The word salah means when you feel like you
Mulana, we can't hear you.
I think the feed is cut. Load shedding?
No, I can see the microphone is off on Mulana's side.
There is no audio at all.
No, we don't hear him, but
yeah, I'm back.
okay.
So I'm just having some connection issues. I'm just going to connect another one. Okay. Alright, can you hear me again now? We should be back.
Yes, Malana, we can hear you now.
Okay, Mulana.
Alladhi, the one that yasla, the one that enters an-nara, the fire, al-kubra. What's kubra mean?
Big fire, the great fire.
Greatest.
The greatest fire, the biggest fire. What did I say about Yusra? If I gave you some sort of stuff about Yusra. What did I tell you about Yusra?
It's female, Maulana.
It's a female, yes, but the female for what?
Superlative.
Just check your notes there, What's the male of Al-Yusra?
Isra.
Yeah, see, this is the lowest level, and what's level 1 level higher? So basically, remember what happens is this is going to be your trappe van vergelijking, your degree of comparison. Yeah, so kabir means big, bigger or greater means akbar, and the greatest means al-akbar. But that you only use for a male thing. You with me? You only use it for a male thing. So you won't say an-naru al-akbar, because it's now nar male or female? Female. Therefore you say an-nara al-kubra, which means the greatest. Remember we said the same thing on Sharia. Not ash-shari'atu al-aysar, the easy Sharia, ash-shari'atu al-yusra. Does that sound familiar? Kind of, not okay. Anyway, the main point of the make is al-kubra is the same as al-akbar. Al-akbar is the male version, and the female version is al-kubra. Why did Allah add al-kubra? Why add al-kubra, the greatest? Because what is your reference point for fire? Worldly
Fire of this
The
world?
point is worldly fire.
Yes.
In other words, you make a campfire, or like a tree burns down, or maybe you have a forest burning. So you have different degrees of worldly fires. You can have a small fire, you can have a house burning down, you can have a whole city burning down. You have different degrees of worldly fires. Allah is telling them, and this is early Makki surah now. This is not like some sort of like small fire. This is an-narul al-kubra, the greatest of fires. The greatest of fires. The greatest. Al-Aysar. So you get the male version, Yasir. Greatest. It's the most means the most in for the female forms.
The link is unstable, it seems, Sheikh.
Jay, you're right.
Kutuma means then.
Losing Maulana.
What's happening here? Can you guys hear me? Why is it jumping back to this?
On and off Maulana.
It's
Okay,
on
let's
and
make
off,
my-
it's interrupted.
Let's see what's happening here. What is happening with this? Okay, I think are you back? Anna, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, Sheikh.
Yes, Maulana.
Okay. Okay, bismillah. ثم لا يموت فيها ولا يحيا. ثم, what does ثم mean? Then,
Maulana,
then
sorry,
immediately-
Maulana. We're not seeing the
Sorry?
text. We're not
You're
seeing
not
the
seeing
text.
the
Text.
text. Let me just share again with you quickly. Okay, so Bismillah. So thumma means what? Then, immediate time gap. Time gap. In Arabic, we call it at-tarahi. It's for tarahi means that there's a delay. In other words, Allah is saying that the ashqa is going to enter the narul kubra. The ashqa is going to enter into the greatest fire. Thumma, then after a while, after the ashqa is going to be in the greatest fire, la yamutu fiha wa la yahya. La yamutu fiha. What's la yamutu fiha? This ashqa will not die fiha in it. Why is it mentioned the one die in it? Because again, your point of reference is worldly fire. Your point of reference is worldly fire. So Allah said about the worldly fire, first of all, it's not like worldly fire, this is al-kubra, it is the greatest fire. And then obviously you think that, okay, worldly fire, if I enter into the worldly fire, which is like the greatest, whatever notion that is, then definitely I must die. Allah says here, ثُمَّ لَا يَمُوتُ فِيهَا. Then the person will not die in it. Meaning what? It will burn out and die. وَلَا يَحْيَا. And the person won't live. So what this means doesn't mean the person will be between life and death. What does it actually mean? It means there when the person won't live in others, the person won't live like free of this fire. Because now you think, okay, I'm not going to die in it. Maybe I'm going to get out of it before I die and I'm going to live. I'm going to recover from it. Because remember, Allah is dealing with a worldly concept all the time. Because now you think, now, okay, I didn't die in the greatest fire, it means I maybe escaped. And I lived afterwards. Allah said, no, you're not going to die in it. No, you're going to live, in other words, like escape and live keep on living basically. Meaning what? That you will live forever in the fire. Not a different type of life. Because Allah is negating the limitations of worldly comparison. It doesn't mean that you'll be in an in-between state. Which you might take from the verse when you look at it first. Yeah. You have a question? Yes. 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 So the idea is that death compared to Jahannam is going to be a reprieve. So they won't die in that sense as well. There's been no reprieve from it. There'll be no because death will be a reprieve. No. Obviously, those who burn, there's two categories. There are those who are going to burn in hellfire, and those who are going to be, all of them are those who are going to remain in hellfire, and those who are going to be saved afterwards. So in other words, those who are saved afterwards are those who have some iman in them, and they'll be removed, and they'll be bathed, and they'll be reborn basically, and then enter into paradise afterwards. And then there will be those who will basically remain in hellfire. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى. قَدْ certainly أَفْلَحَ as thrive, but more means more successful. It becomes successful man, the one that tazakka as purified themselves. So when Allah mentions here, Allah mentions two groups of people. What's the first group Allah mentions? Allah mentions سَيَذَّكَّرُ مَن يَخْشَى وَيَتَجَنَّبُهَا الْأَشْقَى. There's those who are going to remember and those who are going to turn away from the dhikr. Did Allah mention the outcome of those who remember? Remember, there's category and there's outcome. Two categories mentioned. سَيَذَّكَّرُ مَن يَخْشَى, first category. وَيَتَذَكَّرُ وَيَتَجَنَّبُهَا الْأَشْقَى, second category. Did Allah mention the outcome of the first category? Not yet. So Allah mentioned first category, A. So Allah mentioned the first category, A. That's going to be, if I put it, category A. And then Allah mentions category B. And Allah mentions outcome of who? Outcome of B, and this is going to be outcome of
A.
A. Can you see the sequence? Category A, category B, outcome of B, outcome of A. So in other words, you start with A and you end this piece with A and you have B in the middle. قد أفلح قد certainly undoubtedly أفلح ماضي مضارع ماضي fourth verb, meaning what? Has already been successful, meaning what? As it's like a done deal. It's like so sure it's a done deal. قد أفلح has already certainly undoubtedly succeeded. Who has succeeded? Man, the one that تزكى. تزكى means what? To purify. To purify means what? To remove something. So in other words, what do you think is being removed in this context? Just think about early Makkah Surah. So what's being removed? It's an aqidah tazkiyah. Meaning what? It's a tazkiyah of belief. A tazkiyah of belief. Meaning what? What has been removed here? What has been, because tazkiyah means to remove, to clean. So to remove, to clean. We're not speaking here about cleaning your money. We're not speaking here about cleaning your garments. We're speaking here specifically actually about cleaning someone's belief. Because in Makkah is a lot to do with, there's hardly any laws this time. There's hardly very few laws. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى. Certainly has been successful man tazakka, the one that has purified themselves, that was purified themselves from polytheistic beliefs, purified themselves from associating partners with Allah Ta'ala, purified themselves from deeming authority to anybody besides Allah. وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى. وَذَكَرَ, and he remembers and he mentions Isma Rabbihi, the name of his Lord. Dhakara here means mention. It could mean any mention of Allah's name, whether it's Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Ar-Rahman, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, or any of those have Allah's names in. Alhamdulillah, Insha'Allah, Ya Rahman, attributes, Ya Rahim, all of those things. Dhakar can also mean what? Besides mention, can also mean what? Remember. In other words, it can be a state of the heart. It can be a state of the heart here. وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ, that the names or the qualities of Allah Ta'ala is present in this person's heart. No. That's the discussion we had last week. Last week we had that discussion. 2 weeks ago we had the discussion. Remember we spoke about fitrah, we spoke about all of those things, and so basically it's a return to that, because basically all the souls testify to Allah already. Alastu bi rabbikum qalu bala. No, so what we're saying is that there's a pre-configuration for someone, there's a recognition of Allah in the previous existence. When we were souls in the previous existence. Then when we're born with that, we're born pure, with an inclination towards knowing Allah Ta'ala. But we don't deem, let's call it legally, we don't deem those people believers. You with me? So that was the discussion. So, but in other words, there was a recognition before Allah. There's a pre-configuration to know Allah Ta'ala. Therefore, it's almost like an inherent knowledge. Now, وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّي, and therefore, and either mentions the names of Allah Ta'ala in whatever expressions, or can mean, or brings to heart the qualities of Allah Ta'ala. Then Salla, then pray. Salla comes from Sila. Sila means to connect. But here we're speaking about a formal connection. So what happens is the Muslims initially didn't have 5 prayers a day, they used to have 2 prayers a day. They used to pray in the morning and in the evening, that was their Salah. And only on the Mi'raj, it gets changed now to 5 times a day, but they always pray for the Muslims. There was morning prayer and there was evening prayer. I must check I don't know the fiqh before, I will check it inshallah, but my understanding was I'm not sure this is compulsory, I'll check it inshallah. Fasalla. So that, those 3 things there are actually the spiritual path. That is the spiritual path. Meaning what? What's the first part in the spiritual path? Here is tazakka. What does tazakka mean there? To
remember your Lord.
To purify or to remove. You with me? So number 1, you must first purify and you remove. Meaning what? If someone wants to become Muslim, what's the first thing? Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. The first thing is that the purification is no other God. I'm removing every other God. Then the second thing is going to be what? After purification is going to be what? No, before that, dhakara.
Declare.
Mention. So when you mention something, you in a sense, in the first one, you're removing something. You're removing falsity. In the second one, you're adding truth, you're affirming truth. That's fine as well, yes. But the focus I want to make here is that in Islam, we first remove Ashhadu an la ilaha, and then we add. We first remove any falsity, and then it's analogous towards like a container, and the container is dirty. If you want to drink from the container, what do you have to do? You can't just add the milk to it. What you must do, you must first wash it out. You must make tazakka. And when you after make tazakka, what do you do? Then you add wa dhakara asma rabbih. Then you add the remembrance of Allah Ta'ala, because now that is entering into a pure space, into a sound space. And then after you affirm the truth, what do you do?
Right.
And now you must act on it. You with me? So it's going to be 3 parts of the spiritual path. You must first clear your container, your heart. Then you must add truth to it. Dhakara asma rabbih, God consciousness, reflection. But does it stop there? No. It has to then be manifest on your limbs as well. And salah is going to be 2 things. Salah is going to be, number 1, it's going to be an act of ubudiyah. An act, I think Yahya spoke to Allah about ubudiyah. Ubudiyah means you're slave to Allah, Allah Ta'ala. Salah is just a symbol of that. What I mean is a symbol of that. When you say assalamu alaikum, you don't say I'm free. You're still the slave of Allah Ta'ala. If you walk into the masjid, you're still the abd of Allah Ta'ala. You came into the masjid, you made sujood. Why? Because you want to show you the abd of Allah Ta'ala. When you walk out, you're still the abd. You're still the abd. So salah is that act of ubudiyah, and it's also the act of manifestation on the limbs. That act of obedience that I will pray when Allah says I must, how I must. It's the act of manifestation. So you'll find that if people have spiritual ailments, it will be on one of those 3. If someone has an ailment on the first one, what's the problem? For example, someone has one on the first one, the problem there is that they have associates with Allah Ta'ala. And remember, the associate can be one of 2. The associates can be, I deem a fellow God towards Allah Ta'ala, andad or rival, need, or I deem a fellow authority towards Allah Ta'ala. Meaning what? I deem someone else to be in authority of my life besides Allah Ta'ala. Because sometimes you cannot believe in a fellow God, but you can believe someone else has authority. In the first one. No, because in the believers it has authority. No. And then the second one, what's the issue there? The issue there in the second one is that someone is, if you don't have the mention of the names of Allah Ta'ala, you can perhaps not comprehend who Allah is. How do you comprehend who Allah is? The only way you comprehend who Allah is through His names. Because if the being that you can't conceive told you nothing about himself, how can you conceive it? So the being that you can't conceive gave you something conceivable. The being that you can't conceive, Allah is beyond. I think about it sometimes. I know it sounds strange, but I was just like imagine you have a cat. Now imagine you have a cat. And now the cat is like a really silly example anyway. Because my cats always do this. You know, the cat when it doesn't have food, then it always wants to trip you. If you have cats, you know what I mean? It's almost like you must sidestep them. Now that in the cat's perception, they have no idea why you're not feeding them. Maybe you had like a really busy week and you didn't have time to go to the shop. But now you can't like tell the cat, can you just stop tripping me? I had a really busy week. I didn't have time to go to the shop. I'm going to go this afternoon. Just have some sabr. You know what I mean? Or maybe you can't afford cat food. You're saying like, no, you know, there's actually a invasion of Russia to the Ukraine and it's causing a global economic recession, and therefore there are macroeconomic consequences there, and I don't have money to buy your food. I'm just talking about the degrees of appreciation of complexity. You with me? So if we can understand, a cat cannot perceive that. The cat just wants the food and he will trip you until you get the food. You know, he's not going to buy any argument. Now I'm saying take that same relationship and take yourself, between yourself and Allah Ta'ala. You with me? The complexity of you with regard to Allah Ta'ala is beyond the cat in you. So your conception of who Allah is, what reality is, you can't manifest who He is. Because He is so wara. Wara means beyond. So when someone is so beyond what they can do, they can only make themselves close by giving you things in your own language to attach yourself. So what other faiths do, and this is unique, other faiths do is that they put something in between Allah and them to make it easy to attach themselves to Allah. They put a man there, they put a few carving stones there. They put that because Allah is so far, I can't get to Allah, so let's put this here because it's easier for me. I can go here, I can jump here and go there. You with me? What Muslims, what Allah does, and this is like, for me, like the beauty of Islam, because Allah is beyond but also close. Like we have no problem with holding both at the same time. We have no problem that Allah is like closer to you in jugular vein. Wherever you turn like that, you know, that closer to Allah Ta'ala. I'm not speaking about spatial now, I'm speaking about like in terms of rank and degree and so on. But we have no problem feeling Allah is close to us and intimate and present in a, not in a physical sense. And then we have no idea also with the idea that Allah is the King of Kings and beyond all creation and the supreme authority. We can hold both at the same time. But other faiths, what they'll do is they'll put an intermediary because there's the close one, there's the Father and the Son. You know what I mean? The far one and the close one. Or there's this God and there's Brahma, there's like this, the other gods, and there's the ultimate God. But we don't do that. So how does Allah address our need for closeness? By giving names. You know, the name is the only way you know Allah. When He says Al-Khaliq, oh okay. Al-Basir, oh okay. Al-Alim, oh okay. Al-Wadud, oh okay. Al-Shakur, oh okay. Even if I'm adding what I'm doing, I'm building my understanding of Allah Ta'ala. If I took all the names away and only had Allah, how do I know He's Rahim? How do I know He sees me? How do I know He loves me? How do I know He appreciates me? You with me? How do I know those things? Allah adds the names, why? So you can know about Allah Ta'ala. So therefore, Dhakar Asma Rabbi, if you don't have that, then you have a deficiency in your knowledge of Allah Ta'ala. Or you have an incorrect perception of Allah Ta'ala. I believe sometimes number two, a lot of Muslims suffer from that. Why? Because if you get like a negative perception of Allah Ta'ala, like He's not punish you all the time, then you haven't gotten all the isms of Allah Ta'ala. You've only got the Jalal, harsh isms. You didn't get the other part. So there you can have a deficiency. Then the third spiritual thing is going to be where? Fasalla. Meaning what? You can have the belief of Allah Ta'ala, but they still have the nafsi challenge of living it out. Number three is where you're dealing with your nafs. So 1 and 2, you're dealing with i'tiqad of belief. And number 3, you're dealing with your nafs. Because your nafs doesn't want to always obey. So salah is obedience. So therefore, let me just conclude and say that 1 and 2, those are what you would call shubuhat. The sins of shubuhat. Not sins of shubuhat, the shubuhat is the essence of that wrongdoing. Shubuhat means that you have a incorrect belief. For number 1, your shubuhat is that you associate partners with Allah Ta'ala or you deem fellow authority. In number 2, your shubuhat is that you misconceive the being of Allah Ta'ala. Even though you believe in the being, you misconceive the being. For example, shubha can, if you believe that Allah doesn't provide for you. You believe that your work provides for you. You don't believe Allah's name is Ar-Razzaq. You know what I mean? Like you almost don't have it belief as a shubha, but it's Ar-Razzaq. And then number 3 is going to be about shahawat. It's going to be about the sins of the soul and the heaviness of people and the laziness of people, and therefore fasalla. So it's going to be in those 2 lines are basically the spiritual path that we have to act, and in those 2 lines are basically where people go wrong. And that's what you find about Makki Surah is very comprehensive. It's like brief, but it's like the whole science is there. You can like write a book about a science. And I remember Hamza used to say something profound. He says about great books. We speak of books in general. Great books is you can take 1 line and you can write a whole book about it. He says about poor books, which is literature now, you can have a whole book and you can summarize in a few lines. And then like books that have little substance, you can say, okay, just use 1, 2, 3. Books with immense substance, each line can become a book. Each concept can become a book. There's and obviously the Quran is the book of books. And therefore there are books about the book called tafsir in the thousands, you know what I mean? So that is the idea behind the greatness of the Quran. قد أفلح من تزكى وذكر اسم ربه فصلى بل تؤثرون الحياة الدنيا بل rather تؤثرون. What's the meaning of تؤثرون? The word ether means what? Ether means when you have a choice between 2 things and you exercise your choice to give preference. What you find there in tu'thiruna is that you find there's something called tu'thiruna. Who is the audience Allah is speaking to? But all before this, Allah has been speaking about قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى Allah said previously here, وَجَنَّبُهَا الْأَشْقَى الَّذِي يَصْلَى الْكُبْرَى ثُمَّ لَا يَمُوتُ فِيهَا وَلَا يَحْيَى. Or third person. What you have here is you have iltifat to the second person. Not بَلْ يُؤْثِرُونَ, rather they prefer. بَلْ تُؤْثِرُونَ, rather you prefer.
You.
Almost like Allah is speaking about something, Allah speaks like, almost like you get like a shock. Because he's like, you. And also it speaks to you, the reader as well. You the reader, you the listener, you prefer al-hayat ad-dunya. So what does bal mean? It negates something. So what can it negate in the past, in the previous ayat? Okay, so in the previous part, it can negate what? It can negate either
the desire for your worldly life.
It can either negate it can either negate. Remember, there's 2 things here. There's an action and there's a consequence. There's an action and there's a consequence. What's the action here? The action of the believers is that they make dhikr. The action of the believers is that they have fear. The action of disbelievers is that they turn away. The consequence of the believers is that they're going to have aflaha. They're going to be successful. The consequence of the disbelievers is going to be yaslana al-kubra thumma la yamutu fiha wa la yahya. It's going to be the consequence. So the rather can there to go against the negation of the consequence, meaning what? Meaning what? You are going, not you, the believers are going, the disbelievers are going to enter the hellfire, they're going to burn therein, they won't die, they won't live in it. But rather, tu'thiruna al-hayat ad-dunya, you still keep preferring the worldly life, even after hearing the consequence. You with me? Or it can be, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى. The ones who are successful are the ones that remember and will purify themselves and remember Allah, but you keep preferring it. You with me? The bal can be with regard to the consequence, or it can be with regard to the attitude of the believers. The attitude of the believers is that they they purify themselves, they remember Allah Ta'ala, but you still keep preferring the worldly life. The outcome of disbelievers is that they will burn in the hellfire, they won't live, they won't die, they will live in a state of burning, but you still keep preferring the worldly life. You with me? So the ball can go back to either the outcome of the disbelievers or the action of the believers. I don't know if all that made sense, it was a bit fast, but inshallah. No. No. So it refers to the attitude of the believers is that they're purifying themselves, they're making salah, but you disbelievers, you still preferring the worldly life. They doing that, they are showing a good attitude, but you are not, you are still preferring the worldly life. Both, yes. Both. What I'm saying, both explanations. This is only aimed at disbelievers. But I'm saying it is born out of you heard the consequences, believers, but you still prefer the worldly life. You hear how the believers respond to this, but you still prefer the worldly life. You with me? So I'm saying both. A reference to two things, but it's one group I was speaking to. Now, بل rather تؤثرون. Now, Bismillah.
But is it also maybe like a warning for the believers to say, you know,
Can also be a warning for the believers, yes. No, so it can also be a warning for the believers. In terms of the general sense, it can be a warning in terms of you look at the ayah on its own. But you look at the ayah in the context of the theme, it's more towards the disbelievers. But on its own, yes, it can also be like a secondary meaning, can be a warning to the believers. Bal rather, so instead, tu'thiruna, you disbelievers, or let's say you heedless Muslims, maybe can also be, but mostly disbelievers, tu'thiruna, you give preference to al-hayat, the life, ad-dunya, the worldly, the low life, the worldly life. This is one of the strongest, and for me, like I shudder when I read this, because I always think in Prophet is born in 570. 570 is the 6th century. In 6th century Makkah, how much dunya is there really? You know what I mean? Like it's for me, like for me, this is like one of the scariest things. In 6th century, how much dunya is there really? Like how much dunya? Okay, is a few nice garments, a couple of horses and camels. Maybe it's like a little garden. Maybe it's not this is like a desert land, so it's not really much gardens in Makkah. You know, property is not really a big thing. You know, there's a valley with like hardly any vegetation. So Allah is telling them you prefer. So okay, maybe you can think, okay, they want authority and might. That makes a lot of sense because they are in charge of like Arabia in the sense they have authority, they have might. But it just scares me when I read this because like if we must live that life, we'd almost be like super Sufis. Because you know what you're eating every day. Humble means you're like living you're like living in tough times. Like that for us will be like a life of like difficulty perhaps. So these ayahs for me, it's actually difficult to read these ayahs. Because like we question ourselves, like because we are like excessive dunya in our lives. So it's good introspection, these ayahs. بَلْ تُؤْثِرُونَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا, but you give preference, you choose the worldly life. وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرُ وَأَبْقَى وَالْحَالِيَةُ, whilst the akhirah, the year after, is khayrun, is better. وَأَبْقَى, baqiya means to remain, to last. Abqa means greater in remaining, greater in lasting, basically everlasting. إِنَّ هَذَا لَفِي الصُّحُفِ الْأُولَى. So that's the 16, 17 is about what's coming in the year after and what the attitude should be. إِنَّ هَذَا, verily this, la, is definitely fi, in the suhuf, the pages, al-ula, the previous pages. So we're thinking about the suhuf of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, the early revelation. When Allah says هذا, what does Allah mean هذا? Can mean one of two things. هذا can mean that the message in the surah has been in the previous pages. You with me? The message in the surah can be in the previous pages. Or it can mean that Allah is actually quoting the verse that was revealed in the previous suhuf and re-quoting it here. It will be from verse number 14. There's actually a narration of that. I don't know how authentic the narration is. From verse number 14. Meaning what? From verse number 14, that specifically that verse, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى بَلْ تُؤْثِرُونَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى إِنَّ هَذَا. Verily these last four verses, لَفِي صُحُفِ الْأُولَى. That they were certainly in the previous suhuf. Why do I mention that? Because I mentioned in the narration. There's a narration of it where the Prophet, where one of the Sahaba, I forget the name who it was now, when the Sahaba asked the Prophet what was in the previous suhuf. And then he asked the Prophet, do you still like narrate any of those things? And then they mentioned these four ayat. I don't know how authentic that narration is. I don't know what the authenticity of it. But what I'm saying is, when Allah says inna hadha, can mean the message of the surah, or it can mean the specific actual verses. La fi suhuf al-ula, wa in the previous suhuf. What's the previous suhuf? Suhuf Ibrahim wa Musa. It will be in Arabic now, but basically the message of it is. The message and the concept is. The suhuf. Yeah, I think maybe Musa, I don't know. I think the Injil was Aramaic, I'm not sure, but maybe Musa, whatever language they had there. No. The suhuf of Ibrahim and Musa. Alhamdulillah, with that we end the surah, beautiful surah. Now.
What's the relevance of Musa? They can add it at the times of Jesus. Have an understanding.
The Arabs would have some exposure towards Jews because of trade as well. They wouldn't. They have some news of the Jews because of the trade, and also because it's like foreboding. I'm saying it's the surah is going to eventually be in Medina as well. You understand what I mean? So obviously, because there's a timeless element to it as well. But they would have some exposure to the Ahlul Kitab as well in Nabi Ibrahim. And I think the idea here is that the idea of Islam is something which is timeless. From Nabi Adam to Nabi Ibrahim, Nabi Musa, it's the same message. There's no ikhtilaf in the message. There's just ikhtilaf in the Sharia. And we have Sharia al-Yusra. We have the easiest and we have the most, the best for us basically, the best for our times now. So may Allah bless and guide, may Allah accept our surah. Read the surah with tadabbur, with meaning, with pondering. We've discussed many hours on the surah, but read it with tadabbur and understanding. It's one of the surahs the Prophet used to recite very often is the surah A'la and Ghashiyah as a pair. A'la and Ghashiyah used to recite very often as a pair in Salah as well. So it was one of the frequently recited surahs by the Prophet ﷺ in his Salah. Barakallah. We will be off for 2 weeks, so inshallah may Allah bless and protect all of you. We hopefully see you. The holiday is always a test because you have 2 Sundays off and you're like, wow, Sunday at home is nice, but Sunday in class is always better. It's always going to be better. You can always satiate enough some other time, inshallah. May Allah bless and protect. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Was clear, we'll be with you shortly, inshallah.